The day my mama was laid to rest, my husband made a spectacle of throwing my life onto the front lawn as if it meant nothing. There I stood in my funeral dress, my hands trembling, watching my clothes and memories crushed beneath his indifference. The things that had made me feel human, whole, reduced to a pile of trash. I was Dorothy Mae Johnson, 68 years old, and I had just witnessed the man I had spent decades supporting throw me away like I was nothing. But I wasn't done yet. Let me rewind, though, because this tale is woven with 42 years of survival, sacrifice, and yes, betrayal. In those years, I had come to believe I was invisible, just another face in the crowd, just another woman who lived in the shadow of someone else's success. But the truth is, that wasn't my story. It was a lie I had convinced myself to believe for far too long. It all began in 1982 when I met Richard Coleman. I was 26 and working at Memorial Hospital as a surgical nurse, scrubbing in for procedures, dreaming of graduate school, and living in a tiny apartment in the city. I was saving every penny, my life filled with ambition and hope. But then Richard came into my world, 28 years old, a charming, driven orthopedic resident with perfect teeth and a smile that could make your heart race. He had dreams of private practice, of becoming a renowned surgeon, and he told me everything would be better with him by my side. Our hospital had recently integrated its surgical team, and I was one of only 3 black nurses in the department. Richard didn't care about that, though. He asked me out after one particularly long 12-hour shift, and we went to a little Italian place where he opened up about his hopes for the future, about his dreams of success. He even asked about mine. No man had ever asked me that. Really listened until Richard. We talked for hours that night. He told me he admired my ambition, my plans for a future in nursing, perhaps even opening a clinic for underserved communities. And just like that, the man who seemed so perfect became my whole world. His family, on the other hand, was a different story altogether. Barbara Coleman, his mother, had a way of looking at me that made me feel like I didn't belong in their world. The first time I went to their home in Glen Haven, a sprawling colonial in an exclusive neighborhood, she looked me over, her eyes cold, before commenting on how sturdy my name was. That's how it started. I should have listened to Kesha, my best friend, who had warned me. "Girl, that woman looked at you like you were dirt on her shoes," she'd said, but I didn't listen. I was 26 and I was in love. Richard told me things would get better once we got married, and I believed him. So when he proposed 6 months later with his grandmother's diamond ring, I didn't hesitate. The wedding was small, just how Richard's family liked it, no fuss. Later, I found out Barbara had sent a letter to her relatives urging them not to attend. "It would be better this way," she'd written. At the ceremony, my mama, Rosa Mae, had come up from Alabama. She pulled me aside before I walked down the aisle. "Baby girl, are you sure about this?" she asked. "That woman looks at you like you're taking something that don't belong to you." "Mama, I love him," I told her. "I know you do," she replied, "but does he love you enough to stand between you and her?" I had no answer. But I walked down that aisle anyway. The first few years weren't awful. Richard was busy building his career, working those endless hours at the hospital. We had kids, Michael 9 months after the wedding and Jennifer 2 years later. But Barbara was always there, lurking, undermining. I told myself it would get better, that it would be different once Richard's career stabilized, but deep down I knew I had made a mistake. Things started changing when Michael was born. Barbara's first visit to our home came after Michael came home from the hospital. I had just delivered my baby, and Barbara, with her icy demeanor, took one look at him and said, "At least he has Richard's nose." That's something, but Richard wasn't there to hear it. He was always at the hospital, always. Soon, my husband started asking me to quit my job as a nurse. "It doesn't look right," he told me. "A doctor's wife should be at home, supporting the career, not working like we need the money." So I quit. 3 months later, I was expected to stay home and raise our children. Years passed, and I slowly faded into the background. I stopped working. I stopped making decisions. Richard and Barbara's voices became the ones that filled the space where my dreams used to live. I wasn't just invisible to the world, I had become invisible to myself. But something was about to change. A small crack in the wall of my life appeared one ordinary morning when I discovered a text message from Angela Carter, a nurse at Richard's office. The message read, "Last night was amazing." When can I see you again? That was the moment when everything I'd ignored for years came rushing back. Something inside me clicked, no more pretending, no more silence. I reached out to Kesha after 3 long years. Girl, is Richard cheating on me? I asked. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, I've been waiting for you to see it. Come meet me right now. I didn't know it then, but my life was about to change forever. As I sat across from Kesha in that coffee shop, I realized I had been living a lie for far too long. But now I could see the truth, and I wasn't about to let Richard or anyone else keep me in the dark. I didn't want to believe it at first. I didn't want to acknowledge the truth that had been staring me in the face for years. Richard, the man I had devoted my life to, was having an affair. Not just any affair, but with Angela Carter, the nurse practitioner he had worked with at his practice. But as I sat across from Kesha that day in the coffee shop, I realized that this wasn't just about infidelity. This was about control, manipulation, and the slow destruction of who I was. Kesha listened as I poured out everything I had noticed over the years, the late nights Richard spent at the hospital that didn't add up, the expensive gifts I'd found on our credit card statements, and the strange hotel charges for dinners he hadn't taken me to. There was so much, and I had been blind to it all, or at least too afraid to see it. But now, with Kesha's support, I could finally hear the truth. Richard had been living a double life, and so had I. Do you think you're the only one he's been fooling? Kesha asked gently. Honey, I've been waiting for you to wake up to this. You've been surviving all these years, keeping it together for everyone else, but now it's time to stop. It's time to start living for you. I nodded, though I felt the weight of it all crushing me. But what am I supposed to do? I've got nothing. I've been out of the workforce for 30 years. No career, no money of my own. Richard controls everything. Kesha leaned in, her eyes sharp with determination. You've got something more important than all that. You've got your mind and you've got time. Start there, document everything. Every late night, every unexplained expense, every lie. Take pictures. Open a bank account he doesn't know about. Get your independence back piece by piece. Because trust me, girl, if Richard is who I think he is, he's not going to let you go quietly. The words hit me like a punch in the gut, but they also lit a fire inside me. I had been living as if I was trapped, like I had no options. But now, Kesha was telling me something different, something I had never allowed myself to believe. I had the power to change things. That night, I went home and looked in the mirror for the first time in years. Really looked. My face had aged, but it was still mine. My hair, once dyed to fit Richard's preferences, had started to show its natural gray, and I felt a sense of pride in it. I wasn't some perfect ornament to be displayed on Richard's arm. I was a woman with her own history, her own strength. I wasn't invisible anymore. I made a plan. The next day, I opened a separate bank account. A small one, just for me. It wasn't much, but I was going to start saving every penny. Richard gave me a household allowance of $2,000 a month for groceries and personal expenses, and I had always spent it, terrified of being seen as wasteful. But not anymore. I became frugal. I shopped for bargains, used coupons, bought store brands, and saved everything I could. For the first time in my life, I was building something for myself. Slowly but surely, the money started to add up. I also started selling things online, old clothes I never wore, jewelry Richard had given me over the years, furniture I no longer needed. I listed everything from the public library, making sure Richard wouldn't find out. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And then I met Evelyn Washington. Evelyn lived 3 houses down from us in Glen Haven, though we'd never really talked. She was 75, sharp as a tack, and wealthier than anyone knew. I had heard rumors about her. Barbara had always made it clear that Evelyn was new money and not really our kind of people. But Evelyn saw me, saw the struggle in my eyes, and one day she approached me. We met for tea at her house. It was smaller than ours, but cozy and beautiful, filled with art and life. She poured the tea and got straight to the point. I know what you're going through, she said. Your husband's cheating. Probably has been for years. Your mother-in-law treats you like help. You've got no money of your own, no way out, and you're terrified. Am I close? I sat there frozen, tea trembling in my hands. How do you know all this? Because I lived it, she said, her eyes far away for a moment. I spent 30 years with a man who controlled every penny, every decision. He thought I was too afraid to leave, too loyal to protect myself. And I let him. But you're not going to make the same mistake I did, not if I can help it. She taught me everything: how to hide money, how to open accounts Richard didn't know about, how to build credit in my own name. But the most important lesson she gave me was this: you can take back what was stolen from you, but it has to be done in secret, with patience and with strategy. Over the next 2 years, Evelyn became my mentor. She taught me how to document assets, how to start my own business, how to protect myself. I opened a second account under my mother's name in Alabama just in case. I started taking online courses in bookkeeping, telling Richard I was learning to bake sourdough bread. The truth was, I was learning how to protect myself financially. By the time I turned 64, I had $28,000 saved in my secret account, a skill I could use to support myself, and a growing file of evidence about Richard's hidden assets. But there was one thing I still didn't have: a place to go. Don't rent, Evelyn told me. Buy a place that no one can take from you. It sounded crazy. How could I afford to buy a house? But Evelyn had a plan. She showed me a property in Lakewood, 30 miles away, in a different county entirely. It was a small, 2-bedroom craftsman home that needed work, but the price was right: $185,000. I didn't have the money for the down payment, but Evelyn offered me a loan. I set up an LLC using my mother's maiden name, applied for a mortgage using my bookkeeping income, and with Evelyn's help, bought the house. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it was the first step toward freedom. As I sat in that new home, a place that was truly mine for the first time in years, I realized something. Evelyn had taught me not just how to escape, but how to reclaim everything I had lost. In the next step, I had to gather everything I needed to expose Richard's lies. The next few months felt like living two lives simultaneously. I was the perfect wife in Glen Haven, the woman who wore expensive dresses and smiled at charity events, while Richard worked at the hospital, pretending everything was fine. But in Lakewood, I was building something real, something of my own. I spent my days fixing up the house, painting the walls, cleaning the floors, planting a garden in the backyard, and setting up a life that no one could take from me. I had no idea where it would all lead, but I knew it had to start somewhere, and it started with me taking control. The hardest part, though, was what I had to do behind Richard's back. I continued documenting everything: every suspicious charge, every unexplained expense, every conversation that felt off. I photographed documents when Richard wasn't home. Tax returns, bank statements, property deeds, business paperwork, everything I could get my hands on. It felt like a never-ending game of chess, and I had to be 3 steps ahead. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about exposing him for the man he truly was. But even with all the evidence, something still held me back. I wasn't just fighting for a fair divorce settlement anymore. I was fighting for justice, for the truth to come out, for everything he had stolen from me, from our children, from the people he'd deceived. In the middle of all this, Evelyn was my rock. She was the one who taught me to trust my instincts, to believe that I wasn't just some woman who had been stuck in an unfulfilling marriage. I was a person with power, even if I hadn't realized it until now. She reminded me that it was never too late to take back what was mine. One day, as I was going through a pile of old papers in Richard's study, I found something that made my blood run cold: a document labeled Meridian Medical Holdings. The name meant nothing to me, but as I skimmed through the contents, I realized Richard had been hiding more than just money. This was a business, a company that owned commercial properties, office buildings, and more. The total value was staggering: millions of dollars worth of assets, none of which he had disclosed during our divorce proceedings. This wasn't just financial negligence, this was fraud. I remember sitting there in that room for what felt like hours, staring at the document in disbelief. My heart raced as I realized just how deep Richard's deception ran. He had been planning this for years, systematically moving money around to cover his tracks, all while pretending to be the perfect husband, the perfect doctor, the perfect man. When I confronted him later that night, he tried to brush it off. "You're overreacting," he said. "It's just a few investments, it's nothing to worry about." But I knew better. I had seen the truth, and now I had to figure out how to use it. That night, I made a call to Patricia Hayes, my lawyer. I'd been keeping her updated on everything that had been going on, but now I needed to take the next step. "Patricia, it's time," I said, my voice shaking. "I have the evidence. I have everything we need to expose him." "Good," she said, her tone firm. I've been waiting for you to say that. We'll file a motion to freeze all of his assets. We'll take everything he's hiding and bring it into the light. But Dorothy, once we do this, there's no turning back. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had spent too many years living in fear, afraid of what would happen if I spoke up, afraid of losing everything. But now I realized that I had already lost so much. I had lost my identity, my career, my sense of self, but I wasn't going to lose myself any longer. The next day, I met with Patricia and Gloria Patterson, the private investigator who had been helping me piece everything together. We went over the evidence piece by piece. The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, the hidden properties, the fraudulent billing practices Richard had been using to steal millions from patients and insurance companies. It was overwhelming, but it was also the key to everything. With this evidence, we could bring him down. I wasn't sure what would happen after we filed the motion, but I knew one thing for certain: this was no longer about saving my marriage. This was about taking back my life and making sure Richard faced the consequences for the damage he had done. But even as I prepared to expose Richard, there was still the issue of my children. Michael, my son, had always been caught in the middle of Richard and me. He had seen the way his father treated me, but he had also seen me shrink year after year to accommodate Richard's needs. Jennifer, my daughter, had been closer to Barbara, and I had watched her pull away from me, distancing herself from the woman I had once been. It was Michael who called me first, the day after I'd filed the motion. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "What are you doing?" "I'm doing what I should have done years ago," I told him. "I'm standing up for myself. I'm fighting for what's right." Michael was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice filled with emotion, he said, "I wish I had done more. I wish I had stood up for you sooner." "You don't have to apologize, baby," I said softly. "You were just trying to survive too. But now, we're going to do this together." And we would. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was Michael's, Jennifer's, and the fight of every woman who had ever been told she was invisible, that she didn't matter. We were all going to rise together. Rehook. As I prepared for the battle ahead, I realized that this was just the beginning. Richard had thought he could control me for the rest of my life, but he was wrong. I was about to show him and everyone else what happens when a woman finally learns how to fight back. The next few weeks felt like a strange mix of tension and quiet. On the outside, everything looked normal. Richard went to work, the kids went to school. I kept up the facade of the perfect, dutiful wife. But inside, a storm was brewing. I had started to see myself as the woman I used to be, the ambitious nurse, the one with big dreams, the one who wasn't afraid to fight for herself. The truth was, I was more than ready for what was coming. It had been a month since I filed for divorce. My lawyer, Patricia, had submitted a motion to freeze Richard's assets, and we were waiting for the court date. In the meantime, I continued to build my case. The more I dug, the more I found. Bank statements showing $200,000 in unexplained transfers, a vacation property in Aspen that Richard had forgotten to mention. Medical bills from patients who had been overcharged for procedures they hadn't even received. It was all adding up, and with every document I felt a little more free. But even as I strengthened my case, I had to face the uncomfortable reality that this wasn't just about me. This was about everything Richard had done to our children. Michael had seen the way his father treated me for years, and now Jennifer was beginning to see it too. She had always been Barbara's ally, staying close to her grandmother, believing Richard's lies about me. But the cracks were starting to show. One evening after dinner, Jennifer came to me. She looked hesitant, like she was about to say something important. "Mom," she began, her voice soft, "I need to talk to you about something." I looked up from the dishes and nodded, wiping my hands on the towel. "What's on your mind, baby?" She sat down beside me, twisting her fingers in her lap. "It's about Dad and Angela." The mention of Angela made my stomach churn, but I kept my voice steady. "What about them?" Jennifer sighed, her eyes filled with confusion and hurt. "I saw them together the other night after you left for Alabama. I didn't know what to think at first, but I don't know, Mom, they were so comfortable with each other, and Angela was wearing your bracelet, the one Dad gave you for your birthday." My heart sank, but I knew this moment was coming. "He's been lying to all of us," I said, my voice quiet. "He's been living a double life, and now we have to face the truth." "I don't know what to do with all of this," Jennifer said, shaking her head. "It's like everything I believed in is falling apart." I reached out and took her hand. "It's not your fault, Jennifer. You're not the one who built this lie, but now you need to see the truth for what it is. Richard is not who you thought he was." "I know," she whispered. "But I can't just ignore it anymore." "You don't have to," I said, squeezing her hand. "You're not alone in this. We're all in this together." It wasn't easy for Jennifer to admit that her father wasn't the man she thought he was, but she was beginning to see what I had been too blind to see years ago. Richard had deceived all of us. He had manipulated me, taken advantage of our children, and now it was time for him to pay the price. Meanwhile, Michael had become more involved in my fight. He wasn't the same man I had raised. He was no longer the child who couldn't speak up. Michael had become a man who wanted to help me, protect me. He even offered to help with the legal fees, though I had to remind him that this was my fight. "I know, Mom," he said one night, his voice steady, "but I can't sit back and watch this happen to you anymore. He doesn't deserve to have you stay quiet." It was hard not to be moved by the way Michael stood up for me. I realized that all these years I had put my children in the middle of this war without them ever knowing it. But now they were seeing the truth, and they weren't going to let me be dragged down any longer. The day of the hearing arrived sooner than I expected. I had been preparing for this moment for years, but when it came, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. The air felt thick with tension, like something was about to snap. Richard had no idea what he was up against. He thought he could control the narrative, that he could continue pretending everything was fine. But I had something he didn't: evidence. The kind of evidence that would tear apart his empire of lies. I dressed carefully that morning, nothing flashy, nothing to make me stand out. I wore a simple navy suit I had bought for my bookkeeping business, something professional, something that said I was serious. The day wasn't about revenge. It was about showing the world who Richard really was. When we walked into the courtroom, Richard was already there, sitting with his lawyer, William Ashford, who looked like he'd been through the ringer. He probably had. Richard's arrogance had been his downfall. As I sat down beside Patricia, I couldn't help but notice how different everything felt. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, and I realized that this was it, the moment when the truth was going to come out. Richard glanced over at me, his eyes narrowing. He still didn't know what was coming. The judge entered, a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She didn't look at me with sympathy. She didn't look at Richard with pity. She was all business, and that was exactly what I needed. Ashford started first, trying to dismiss everything. "Your Honor," he began, "this motion is a transparent attempt to delay proceedings. My client has been more than generous, offering a fair settlement. But the judge wasn't having any of it." "I've reviewed the filings, Mr. Ashford," she said, her voice cutting through the air. "Your client has disclosed $2.1 million in assets. Mrs. Coleman's attorney has provided evidence showing over $20 million in hidden assets. Care to explain that discrepancy?" I could see the color drain from Richard's face. He hadn't been expecting this. He wasn't in control anymore. As the judge began to break down the case piece by piece, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was what I had been working for all these years. Richard thought he could bury me, but I was about to bury him with the truth. As the judge's words echoed in the courtroom, Richard's smug composure started to crack. I could see the nervous tick in his jaw, the way his fingers tapped against the table as if he were trying to regain control of the situation. But it was too late. I had done my homework, and it was all coming out now. The floodgates were open, and there was no way to shut them. Patricia Hayes was in her element, cool and unflappable as she presented the evidence. "Your Honor, we have the documentation to show that Dr. Coleman has been systematically hiding assets, properties, investments, accounts, and failing to disclose them in his divorce filings. The documents presented today, including bank statements, property deeds, and tax returns, clearly demonstrate that his claims are false." I sat in the courtroom, heart pounding, as the judge reviewed the evidence. I'd never felt more alive. This wasn't just a divorce hearing, this was justice unfolding right before my eyes. Every document I had painstakingly gathered over the past few years, every late night spent combing through Richard's hidden secrets, was finally paying off. Richard's lawyer, Ashford, tried to play his usual tricks, dismissing everything as speculation, accusing me of fabricating evidence. But the judge was sharp, and her patience was wearing thin. "Mr. Ashford," she said, her voice steady, "it seems your client has made some significant omissions in his financial disclosures. Care to explain why that is? Ashford hesitated. Your Honor, the nature of these assets is complex. Dr. Coleman has investments that were made through his medical practice. There are legitimate reasons for not disclosing them. The judge raised an eyebrow. Legitimate? You're telling me that a multi-million-dollar investment portfolio, 3 commercial properties, and offshore accounts are somehow not relevant to the divorce settlement? Ashford stammered, trying to explain. But it was obvious he was grasping at straws. Richard's carefully constructed life of lies was starting to unravel in front of everyone. I could feel the weight of years of silence lift off my shoulders. This was it. This was the moment when the truth would finally prevail. As the hearing continued, I couldn't help but glance at Richard. His face had gone pale, his posture stiff. He wasn't the confident doctor anymore. He was just a man who had been caught in a lie. I could see the frustration and panic in his eyes as the weight of the evidence mounted against him. For the first time in years, he looked small, pathetic. The man who had once made me feel so insignificant now had nothing left to hide behind. The judge issued an immediate freeze on all of Richard's assets. Dr. Coleman, she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade, you will not be allowed to transfer, sell, or encumber any of these assets until further notice. I'm also appointing a special master to investigate these claims and determine the full extent of the marital property. Richard's face twisted in anger. He was used to being in control, used to being the one who called the shots. But not anymore. The judge was in charge now, and for once, Richard had no power. As the proceedings wrapped up, I sat there in stunned silence. The motion had passed. Richard's world was about to come crashing down, and I wasn't going to be the one to pick up the pieces anymore. Outside the courtroom, Patricia smiled at me. You did great, Dorothy. This is just the beginning, but we've got them. The special master will take it from here, but you've built an airtight case. I felt a mix of relief and disbelief. For years, I had been invisible, silent, small, afraid of what would happen if I spoke up. But now I had everything I needed to take back control of my life. Richard was no longer the one holding all the cards. I was. The next few weeks were a blur. News of Richard's financial misconduct and the pending investigation spread quickly. The once perfect doctor of Glen Haven was now the subject of gossip and scandal. I'd expected some satisfaction from seeing Richard's world collapse, but I didn't feel the rush of victory I had imagined. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness. It wasn't enough that he had lied, that he had stolen from so many people. It wasn't even enough that I had exposed him. What I wanted now, what I truly needed, was to rebuild my life, to make something of myself that wasn't tied to him, to Barbara, to the years of silence I had endured. I went back to Lakewood, to my new home, the place where I could finally be free. But as I sat in my quiet living room, I couldn't help but think about what came next. This wasn't just about money or assets, it was about reclaiming my identity, about taking the woman I used to be and making her real again. I started by doing something small, something I had never been allowed to do before. I took a walk in the neighborhood, just a walk. No destination, no purpose, just the act of moving my legs, breathing the air, feeling the sun on my face without anyone telling me what I could or couldn't do. It was liberating in ways I never expected. Evelyn came over a few days later, bringing wine and her usual wise counsel. We sat together on my porch, talking about everything and nothing at all. You know, Dorothy, she said, taking a sip from her glass, you've come a long way. You're not the same woman I met a few years ago. You've got fire in you now, and I think it's time you start using that fire for something bigger. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Evelyn smiled, that knowing smile of hers. Start something, a foundation, a place where women like you, women who have been through hell and back, can find the strength to build a life for themselves. Teach them how to take control, how to protect themselves. You've been through this, and now you can show others how to escape. The idea struck me like lightning. A foundation. A place where women could learn to stand on their own, to take back what was rightfully theirs. The Rosa May Foundation. As Evelyn's words sank in, I realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every woman who had been told she was too old, too invisible, too dependent to make a change. It was time to give them a voice, and I was going to be the one to help them find it. I sat with Evelyn long into the evening, the weight of her suggestion pressing on my chest like a promise I hadn't yet made. A foundation, It sounded so grand, so complicated. But when I thought about it, really thought about it, it made perfect sense. What if I could help other women like me, women who had given up everything for the sake of their families, their husbands, their children, only to be left with nothing but a shadow of themselves? Women who had become invisible, who had been made to feel that their worth was tied to someone else. My mind raced with possibilities, a place where women could find safety, resources, and most importantly, freedom. It was the kind of dream I had once held for myself, the kind of dream I had almost forgotten. "Do you think I'm crazy?" I asked Evelyn, half laughing, half serious. Evelyn looked at me over the rim of her glass, her eyes shining with quiet confidence. "No, Dorothy, I think you've finally found your purpose. You've been through it all, now you can help others find their way out." Her words were like fuel to the fire. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it wasn't just about taking back what I had lost. This was bigger. This was about creating something that would outlast me, something that could help women reclaim their lives no matter how old they were, no matter how much they had lost. I didn't sleep that night, my mind wouldn't shut off. I grabbed my notebook and began to sketch out the details, the vision for the foundation, the mission statement, the services we would provide, financial literacy workshops, legal guidance. Documenting assets, building escape plans, it was all coming together. Over the next few weeks, I began to put things into motion. I contacted a few old colleagues from my nursing days, women who had gone on to do great things in their careers. Some were in healthcare, others in law or finance. They were all successful in their own right, and most importantly, they understood what I was trying to accomplish. The Rosa May Foundation began to take shape. The name felt right. My mother, Rosa May, had been my guiding light through all of this. She had always told me that it was never too late to start over, to choose yourself. I would name this foundation after her, in honor of the woman who had taught me the importance of building something for yourself, something that no one could take away. As I started reaching out for help, I was amazed by the support I received. Women I hadn't spoken to in years came forward to offer their expertise, their time, and their resources. It was like a movement was beginning to form, a quiet revolution of women who had been silenced for too long. But even as my foundation grew, I still had to deal with the aftermath of the divorce and Richard's fall from grace. The FBI investigation into his fraudulent activities was gaining steam. News outlets were picking up the story, and the once pristine reputation of Dr. Richard Coleman was being shredded in front of the public. The most shocking part was what I discovered next. The details of Richard's fraudulent practices, billed surgeries that never happened, up-coded procedures to maximize insurance payouts, were just the tip of the iceberg. Gloria Patterson, the investigator who had been working alongside me, had uncovered more. She found documents that linked Richard's actions to a larger network of corruption in the medical field. I had known Richard was hiding money, that he had lied, but this was something bigger than anything I could have imagined. This was about healthcare fraud on a massive scale. Richard wasn't just a cheating husband, he was a criminal. When the charges were filed, the media frenzy was impossible to ignore. Richard, Barbara, and even his lawyer, William Ashford, were implicated in a vast web of criminal activity. The FBI was investigating Medicare fraud, insurance fraud, and tax evasion. Richard's name was tarnished beyond repair. I tried to distance myself from the chaos. I didn't need the drama, I had my own life to rebuild now. But part of me couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction as I watched Richard's life fall apart. For years, I had been the one who was controlled, the one who was invisible. Now, it was his turn to feel powerless. But there was more to the story. As Richard and Barbara's empire crumbled, I learned that the investigation wasn't just about them. It was about the patients they had hurt, the families whose lives had been destroyed by their greed. For all of the legal action being taken against Richard, the real victims were the ones who had trusted him with their health and their money. One afternoon, as I was going through the papers for the foundation, I received a call from an old patient of Richard's. Mrs. Eleanor Harris. She had been a patient of Richard's back in 2018 when he performed a botched hip replacement surgery on her. The insurance company had denied her follow-up surgery because of the fraudulent charges Richard had filed. She had been in pain for 2 years, unable to afford the care she needed. Mrs. Harris, I said, I'm so sorry for what happened. We're doing everything we can to bring Richard to justice, and you're not alone in this. I know, Dorothy, she said, her voice shaky. But I just want to know that something good will come from all of this, that other people won't have to suffer like I did. That was the moment I realized why I couldn't stop now. The foundation wasn't just about Richard or even about me. It was about all the women, all the victims who had been hurt by the system, the ones who had been overlooked, dismissed, and betrayed. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore, I was fighting for all of them. And as the foundation took off, I saw how my life had changed. No longer a shadow in someone else's world, I was creating a legacy, a place where women could learn to protect themselves, to build their own lives, and to never feel invisible again. As the Rosa May Foundation began to take shape, I felt like I was breathing for the first time in years. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my chest and I could finally see the future, my future, clearly. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living, and I was determined to make the most of it. The Foundation's mission was simple but profound: help women break free from financial abuse and regain control of their lives. We provided financial literacy workshops, taught women how to document their assets, helped them create escape plans, and connected them with legal experts who could help them through the difficult process of building a new life. Our first few events were small workshops held in community centers and libraries, but even with small beginnings, the response was overwhelming. Women from all walks of life came forward, eager to learn, to build, to reclaim their independence. The stories they shared were heartbreaking, but they were also empowering. I could see the same spark in their eyes that I had seen in my own reflection just a few years earlier, the realization that they didn't have to stay small anymore. They didn't have to remain invisible. One of the first women I met through the foundation was Janice, a woman in her mid-40s who had been married to a successful entrepreneur for over 20 years. She had given up her career to raise their children and manage their home, but when she found herself facing an unexpected divorce, she was blindsided. She had no access to their joint finances, no savings of her own, and no idea how to rebuild her life from scratch. Janice was just one of many women who had been financially trapped in their marriages, convinced that they were too old, too dependent, or too scared to start over. But after attending one of our workshops, Janice started to take control. She began documenting the financial situation, opening a separate bank account, and looking into her legal rights. It wasn't easy for her, but with each step she took, she grew stronger. She came to me one day with a smile on her face, holding up a document. "I just filed for divorce," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I did it, Dorothy, I'm starting over." That moment, her triumph was everything. It was why I started the foundation in the first place. It wasn't just about me getting out of my golden cage, it was about helping women like Janice and so many others reclaim their independence, their confidence, their lives. But not everyone's journey was as smooth. As the foundation gained more traction, I found myself facing some unexpected challenges. People who had once been close to me, people who didn't understand the work I was doing, began to question my motives. Richard's allies in Glen Haven were still gossiping, still trying to paint me as the villain in this story. They didn't understand why I was doing this, why I was fighting for women who had been hurt by their husbands. Barbara, Richard's mother, was a ghost in my life now. She had been under house arrest since the trial, but I heard snippets of information through the grapevine, how she had isolated herself, how the once pristine image of the Coleman family had begun to crumble. But I wasn't focused on her anymore. She wasn't my concern. Still, there was one thing that weighed on me: Michael, my son. He had been by my side through all of this, but our relationship had always been complicated. He loved his father, and I knew that no matter how much Richard had hurt me, Michael was still dealing with the fallout. I hadn't seen him much since the divorce, and every time we spoke, there was a tension in his voice. One day, I got a call from him. His voice was tight as usual, but there was something different this time. "Mom, I've been thinking," he started, the words coming out slowly. "I want to help with the foundation. I've got some ideas for expansion. I've been talking to a few people who want to partner with us." I was taken aback. "Michael, are you sure about this? It's a lot of work." "This is a big responsibility." He laughed softly, though I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "I know, but I've been thinking about it. You've done so much for me, for us, and I think I need to do more." I want to help you build this. I was speechless for a moment. Michael, my son, the one who had been caught between Richard and me for so many years, was finally stepping up. He was ready to help me build something that mattered. It was a moment of reconciliation for both of us. He wasn't just my child anymore, he was my partner in this. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this journey. With Michael's help, the foundation grew exponentially. We expanded our workshops, reaching more women in different cities. We established a network of legal professionals, financial advisors, and mental health experts who were willing to donate their time and services. The foundation became a resource hub for women who needed help navigating the complicated web of financial abuse. And it wasn't just about the practical help, it was about the emotional support. We created safe spaces for women to share their stories without judgment, to connect with others who understood their pain. The more I worked on the foundation, the more I realized that I wasn't just helping these women, I was helping myself too. The more I gave, the more I received in return. The strength, the courage, and the hope I saw in these women became a part of me. Every time one of them took a step toward independence, I felt it in my bones. We were all in this together, but the hardest part of this journey was still ahead. Richard and Barbara weren't done yet. They were still fighting, still trying to keep me from getting the justice I deserved. I knew that the road ahead would be long and hard. There would be obstacles and there would be times when I doubted myself. But I also knew something else. I wasn't invisible anymore, and that was the greatest power of all. Rehook. As I stood in the foundation's office one afternoon, looking out at the growing number of women who were walking through our doors, I realized something important. It wasn't just about escaping the golden cage. It was about building something that would outlast it, a legacy of strength, independence, and above all, freedom. The months after Michael and I got to work on the Rosa May Foundation felt like a whirlwind of success and challenges. We were helping more women than I ever imagined possible. We had expanded into 3 different cities, and the need for the services we offered was growing. But even as I stood in the middle of this success, I knew the reckoning was coming. Richard and Barbara hadn't given up, and I was still living under the shadow of their influence, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The media was still obsessed with the scandal surrounding Richard, though the frenzy had died down a little. He was facing federal charges for fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy, and while I had no doubt he'd be convicted, I was still dealing with the fallout from his life and everything he had stolen from me. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Richard didn't just steal my money, my career, and my independence. He had stolen my dignity, my sense of worth. And now, here I was, fighting for justice, but part of me still couldn't shake the feeling of being small in his eyes. But I wasn't the same woman I had been when I walked down the aisle all those years ago. I had learned something more important than I ever realized. My value wasn't tied to Richard or anyone else. It was tied to who I was, and I was finally ready to take that power back. One cold morning, I got a call from Patricia Hayes, my lawyer. It had been several weeks since the court ruling on the asset freeze, but I had a feeling something big was about to happen. "Dorothy, I need you to come in," Patricia said, her tone serious. "We've got news on the investigation. The FBI is ready to move forward with their case against Richard, and they need your testimony." I swallowed hard. I had always known this moment would come, the moment when I would be called to stand up in front of a judge, in front of the people who had been part of Richard's world, and tell my story. But I wasn't sure if I was ready. What would it mean for me to go public with all the things I had endured? Was I prepared for the spotlight, for the judgment, for the confrontation with the man who had shaped my life for so long? Patricia seemed to sense my hesitation. "I know this isn't easy, Dorothy, but you've already come this far. You're stronger than you think, and if we do this, if you testify, it will seal the deal. Richard won't be able to hide anymore. This will be his reckoning." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought I had been preparing for this day for years, but now that it was here, I realized how much I had been avoiding the truth. Not just the truth about Richard, but the truth about myself. I had lived in his shadow for so long that I had forgotten who I was, but this was my chance to reclaim it. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady. "Let's do it." The next few days were a blur. I worked with Patricia and Gloria Patterson, the private investigator, to prepare for the court case. We reviewed the evidence one last time: bank statements, medical records, emails, and the text messages between Richard and his mother, Barbara, that had been uncovered in the investigation. These were the smoking guns that would expose the full extent of Richard's deceit. As the trial approached, I couldn't help but think about the years I had spent as a prisoner of my own making. How many years had I spent pretending, living in fear of what would happen if I stepped out of line? How many years had I stayed silent, waiting for someone to give me permission to be seen? I had spent decades telling myself I wasn't enough, but now I was about to stand in front of everyone and prove just how wrong that was. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial. Richard and Barbara were both there, sitting with their attorneys. Richard looked older than I had ever seen him, his face gaunt, his hair thin and gray. There was no trace of the confident, arrogant man I had once known. This man was broken. And the more I watched him, the more I realized just how little he had ever truly mattered to me. This was no longer about him, this was about me. I walked into the courtroom, my heart racing, my hands steady. I took my seat at the witness stand and I felt the weight of the years settle over me. The pain, the hurt, the years of being invisible, they all came rushing back. But this time they didn't crush me, they fueled me. The prosecution called me to the stand. I gave my testimony explaining everything Richard had done, how he had manipulated me, how he had isolated me from my friends and family, how he had lied and cheated, hiding assets, committing fraud. I spoke about the emotional and financial abuse I had suffered, about the lies that had been spun around me for so long. The words came easier than I thought they would. With each sentence, I felt the weight of my silence lifting. The truth was out and I wasn't afraid anymore. As I finished my testimony, I glanced over at Richard. He was sitting there, his face a mask of anger and shame. He hadn't expected me to fight back. He hadn't expected me to expose him like this. And yet, I could feel something shift in the room. I wasn't the same woman who had walked down the aisle to him 42 years ago. I was a woman who had fought for her freedom, who had reclaimed her power. And no matter what happened in the courtrooms or beyond, no one could take that from me. The judge's decision came swiftly. Richard and Barbara were both found guilty of the charges against them, and Richard was sentenced to 12 years in prison for his crimes. As I left the courtroom that day, I felt like I had finally won not just a legal victory, but a personal one. The day Richard was sentenced, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I stood outside the courtroom, my heart still racing, but in a way that felt different, lighter. The months of waiting, the years of silence, all culminated in that moment. Richard was behind bars, his empire of lies shattered. I had won, but more importantly, I had finally reclaimed my life. The world outside the courtroom felt surreal, as if I were seeing it through a new lens. The streets were busy, people rushing to and from their lives, and for the first time I felt like I was part of that world. For years, I had been a spectator, watching everyone else live while I stayed in the background, afraid to be seen. But now I was living for myself. I had created something that would live on long after this chapter of my life was over. The Rosa May Foundation had taken off in ways I hadn't anticipated. Women from all over the country reached out for help, for guidance, for the hope they had lost in their own marriages and relationships. We had expanded our services, providing financial counseling, legal aid, and the kind of emotional support that could help women start over. One afternoon, as I sat in the foundation's office, I looked out the window at the garden I had planted behind my house. The flowers were blooming, the trees were full of life, and I felt that same sense of growth inside of me. Every woman who had walked through the foundation's doors, every woman who had taken that first step toward freedom, was a testament to the power of resilience. And in a way, they had all helped me heal too. Jennifer had been a regular volunteer at the foundation, and Michael had been instrumental in helping expand our reach. We had even started offering online workshops so women from all walks of life could benefit. My children had become not just my family but my partners. For the first time in years, I felt like we were all moving forward together, building something that was truly ours. A few months after the trial, I stood on the stage at a charity gala for the foundation. The event was a huge success, and as I looked out at the crowd, at the women and families who had come together to support the cause, I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with gratitude. For so long, I had believed my life was over. I had believed that the best years of my life were behind me, that I was too old, too broken to start over. But standing here in front of these incredible people, I realized just how wrong I had been. I was just getting started, and this was only the beginning. I want to thank you all for being here tonight, I said, my voice strong and steady. This foundation isn't just about me, it's about all of us. It's about the women who have been told they don't matter. It's about the women who are finally finding their voices. It's about the future we are building together. The applause that followed felt like the loudest, most powerful sound I had ever heard. This wasn't just about the work we were doing, it was about changing lives, lifting people up, and proving that no one, no matter how old or how invisible they feel, is ever truly lost. If you or someone you know has experienced financial abuse or feels trapped in an unhealthy relationship, it's never too late to take back control. The Rosa May Foundation is here to help you find your way out. We offer free workshops, legal consultations, and financial counseling to support women on their journey to independence. Don't wait for permission to live the life you deserve. Take the first step today. Visit Rosa May Foundation website and learn how we can help you start your journey to freedom. And remember, you're never too old, too far gone, or too dependent to begin again. The world is waiting for you to remember who you are. Don't stay invisible any longer.